Hello. I think we're live now. Okay, well, I hope you're enjoying MoonCon 23 Spring Edition. I've been enjoying it so far. I'm Lucya Starza, and thanks very much for coming to my talk on the Wheel of the Year. Now, for those of you who don't know me, I am a Pagan Portals author, of course, Moon Books author, and I've written quite a few books in the Pagan Portals series. I'm going to do the plug. Candle Magic was my first one. Poppets and Magical Dolls, Guided Visualizations, Scrying, and the one that's coming out later this year is Pagan Portals Rounding the Wheel of the Year. And that's kind of what I've based my talk on today. Now, I gave it the title Rounding the Wheel of the Year rather than just the Wheel of the Year, because I wanted to cover magic and lore for each month, as well as pagan celebrations and folkloric customs. Now, many books focus on the 8 Wheel of the Year festivals of Imbolc, Spring Equinox, Beltane, Summer Solstice, Lammas, Autumn Equinox, Samhain, and the Winter Solstice. But sometimes they pay a bit less attention to what's happening on the other days and months of the year. It can be very useful to have a set date to meet up with other people. I mean, it really can be. But every single day, I feel, has its own magical energy. And I feel that the Wheel of the Year turns smoothly. It doesn't just sort of bump over on 8 cogs, although they are a good way of working, especially when you're starting out in witchcraft. It can be really useful to have that as a framework. Now, although my book goes into details about the sabbats of modern pagan witchcraft, it also goes into other ways to honour the seasons. How the months and seasons change vary depending on where you are in the world or where you are. Now, I live in London, in England, but I spend a lot of time on the Sussex coast. And although the Sussex coast is only a couple of hours travel from where I live, I notice that the blossoms and the leaves and the flowers come out about a week later, even though it's not that far away, because it's a little bit cooler by the coast. In other parts of the Northern Hemisphere, the seasons are much later or much earlier, or at least what's blooming and what nature is doing can vary quite a lot. In the Southern Hemisphere, obviously, things are pretty much reversed. In my book, I look at what happens in my area because that's what I'm familiar with. That's what I work with. But I also look at a few things further afield. And what I really try to do is encourage people to work out what's happening in their area, to look at how the seasons are changing in their area, how the year goes round. And also to keep in touch with the seasonal customs and folkloric customs of their own area, because these can change a lot just from short distances away. One county to another can have very, very different festivals, for example. Fates that happen when even something like when they do their when a town does its marathon run each year. What some people do it in early spring, some people will be doing it in the autumn. So I'm going to talk about ways of looking at the seasons and looking at the changing year as it revolves. Now, first, what I'm going to do is talk about the origins of the modern pagan Wheel of the Year. And I'm going to start some slides. I'm hoping that a slide will appear on the screen quite soon. Yes, brilliant. There we go. Right, now the origins of the Wheel of the Year. The concept of the Wheel of the Year with its 8 festivals was inspired by historic customs and the astronomical calendar. But the form we often see today is relatively modern. Ross Nichols, founder of modern Druidry, and Gerald Gardner, founder of the modern pagan religion Wicca, share the honour of devising it in pretty much the form we know today. But they were inspired by ideas that began earlier, particularly in the 18th and 19th centuries. Now, on the left of that slide, the traditional tarot card for the Wheel of Fortune shows an 8-spoked wheel. Although that card is about the cycles of fortune in a person's life rather than about the year, it is an 8-spoked wheel. The Marseille tarot dates from the 18th century and is considered the first modern style tarot deck. Mythologist and fairy tale collector Jacob Grimm is often cited as starting the idea for the Wheel of the Year. In his 1835 book, Teutonic Mythology, he mentions Yule as being an important midwinter festival in ancient times, and he waxes lyrical that Easter fires, May Day fires, and midsummer fires, with their numerous ceremonies, carry us back to heathen sacrifices. Not so sure about the sacrifices, but there you go. In 1890, Sir James Fraser published The Golden Bough, which stated that Beltane and Samhain were important Gaelic festivals because they marked the start of summer and winter, respectively. Margaret Murray's 1921 book, The Witch Cult in Western Europe, tried to identify festivals celebrated by what she believed were surviving groups of historic pagan witches. She wrote that important witchcraft meetings took place on the quarter days of Candlemas on February the 2nd, Roodmass or May Eve on April the 30th, Lammas on August the 1st, and All Hallows Eve on October 31st. Now, although Grimm, Fraser, and Murray are now considered problematic from an academic history perspective, they were widely believed to be accurate in their day, and they were hugely influential in the development of modern paganism. And the books are still a brilliant source of inspiration for creative works and for ideas for rituals. Gerald Gardner's first attempt at writing a cohesive magical system, Ye Book of Ye Art Magical, mentions rites for the main Sabbats for the quarter days, which open the seasons, according to Professor Ronald Hutton in The Triumph of the Moon. Hutton wrote that Yibok is the first place in which recognizable witchcraft-style seasonal ceremonies were described for the 4 festivals that Murray identified as the main witches' Sabbats. And he wrote those that they were intended to be done in private by groups of witches rather than as, say, public ceremonies. Gardner's later book, Witchcraft Today, includes a Yule ritual that is really in a form that many modern pagan witches would identify, they would recognise. Druid revivalist Ross Nichols was a friend of Gardner, and both were members of modern Druid groups, and they enjoyed naturist retreats, which means they like to take their clothes off and sunbathe and so on. And that's according to an article by Philip Cargon, the former chief of Obod. According to a popular legend, the 2 men developed their form of the Wheel of the Year at a nudist resort in the mid-20th century. And the location was possibly influenced the recommendation by Gardner that Wiccan rites perform sky-clad or naked, but that is so not essential. And at this time of year, I really don't think you want to be taking your clothes off, especially outdoors. But the story doesn't quite end. That public domain image of the modern pagan Wheel of the Year on my slide shows Mabon for the autumn equinox. And that name for the autumn equinox is really only dates back to the late 20th century and the writings of pagan author Aidan Kelly. Mabon is a Welsh deity who doesn't have ancient associations with the autumn equinox, but he was kind of given a new designation. And that sort of shows how the ideas of the modern pagan Wheel of the Year are still changing and evolving. I mean, I personally don't really like to use the name Mabon for autumn equinox. I just call it autumn equinox, but many people do, and it kind of shows that things aren't set in stone and never changing. Things are constantly changing, and there's always room for change in practice, in my opinion, at least. Now, the final picture on that slide is a photo that I took showing flowers, leaves, and berries and grains through the seasons. A few are dried, and a few more are actually just paper flowers because, well, they weren't all in season at the same time, obviously. I did try to dry a lot of flowers, but some of them I just had to use paper flowers. Now, what's good about the modern pagan wheel of the year is that it has a mathematical symmetry that is really appealing to a lot of people. And it's really easy to remember. And it does have some history and tradition. But a glance at books on annual folkloric customs, like Steve Roud's The English Year, for example, show that there are many more than 8 customary annual events of note, even just in England. Nowadays, there are generally 3 ways that pagans can choose to ritually celebrate the yearly cycle. You can use Gardner and Nichols' modern Wheel of the Year, or secondly, you can reconstruct or follow historic religious feast days or magical traditions, or thirdly, you can be eclectic and do what feels right for you in your own place and time. Now, personally, I spent many years in a Gardnerian Wiccan coven, and I really appreciate that. I thought it was a wonderful grounding for witchcraft. I've also taken part in reconstructionist ceremonies, and I love to take part in folkloric seasonal customs. But over the past few years, I've become increasingly eclectic, and that's the place in my heart that my practice and writing comes from. And ultimately, how you choose to mark the cycles of nature is up to you. The wheel of the year has always turned as smoothly as the world is round, and it always will. As Professor Ronald Hutton wrote in Queens of the Wild, seasonal activities have always happened in one form or another since prehistoric times. And I'm now going to offer some ideas for practical ways of following the seasons in your own way with art or writing or crafting or gardening, magic and ritual. And then after that, I'm going to talk a bit more about the magic of March. Right, there we have another slide. Ways to observe the changing seasons. The best way to see what's happening in the natural world each month is to go outdoors or just look out of your window if you can't get out. Noticing things with our own senses is better than just reading about them, even if the weather's a bit bad. If all you do each month is spend time recognizing what's bare and what's blooming, or what birds or animals are around, then that's really valid. Look for things like buds or blossom appearing on trees, or seeing swallows or house martins arrive back from winter migration, or spotting fox cubs emerging from their den to play. It doesn't matter if you can't identify the plant or the creature, although it can offer an opportunity to perhaps look them up or do a bit of research. And there's some great apps you can use now that you just point your phone at a plant and it will tell you what it is. Or you can just think, look, that lovely tree has got its blossoms again. That's all fine. I don't think you have to know what a tree is to really appreciate its beauty and its magic. If you live in the countryside or do gardening, then you'll probably notice those things far more readily. But even in cities like London, where I live, there's also greenery. London is actually one of the greenest cities there is, and I live in South London, which has a lot of parks and trees in the streets. Now, the wise old witch, I should say, not the old witch who trained me, that doesn't sound very nice, the wise old witch who trained me, she would always say, before writing a ritual for the Wheel of the Year, look out of the window. What can you see growing there? What's happening in nature? Use that for inspiration. Don't mention ripening apples if the blossom isn't even on the tree yet. And I think that's good advice, even if you're following a more rounded Wheel of the Year journey. And here are a few things you can do each month. Journaling and scrapbooking. Journaling is a great way of recording magical and spiritual work. You can write down spells, rituals, or divinations that you do. You can also make notes about nature, the weather, your thoughts and feelings, and customs that interest you or that you take part in. You can include pictures and photos or keep them separately. There's something lovely about using a beautiful paper notebook, but there's nothing wrong with doing it electronically either. I mean, I started my blog, a Bad Witches blog, at www.badwitch.co.uk, as a personal e-journal as well as to share with others. Scrapbooks are also a lovely visual way of preserving memories. You can put photos and pictures in them along with pressed flowers, tickets from events, greeting cards, or labels from things you've bought. You can add words, but the overall effect is a montage of images. Each page captures the mood of an event, a special day, or a period of time. You can keep a scrapbook alongside a journal, and you can either use traditional paper or apps, and there are scrapbooking apps that you can get. I've actually seen so many scrapbooks appearing in crafting shops as well. I really think it's quite a growing thing. Oh, I've just seen that my slide's gone a bit weird, and we've got the G on another line from scrapbooking. I will sort that out if I ever give this talk again. Right, there's another slide. Get away from that odd G. Yes, the slides are not showing quite the way that I created them, but I guess I hope you can live with that. Here we have a tree through the seasons and a bit more about photography. Even if you don't want to journal or scrapbook, you can still take photos and create photo albums. They're great for recording the changing seasons. Several of the crafts and other activities I suggest are quite ephemeral. Flowers will wilt or dry, and you'll change the things that are on your altar. Seasonal foods will get eaten, presumably, and a photo can keep a record. You could try taking a picture of the same tree each month or even every week to observe its cycles in action. It doesn't have to be a tree out in the wilds of the countryside. One you see regularly is great. It can be in your garden or in the local park, or a street tree that you pass each day. And I photographed that ordinary tree. You can, in the two distance pictures, you can kind of see it in the middle, and then there's a couple of more close-up pictures. Um, and I photographed the tree over a course of a year. That's just 4 of them. It's across the road from my house, and I can see it from my study window when I'm writing. I mean, it's obviously like it's just an ordinary urban street. I mean, it's no it's no great beauty spot, but just seeing that tree and how it's changing makes me feel more in tune with the cycle of nature, even if I'm stuck in my study writing my next book. It's even better if you can get up close to the tree and observe it in detail. Look at the leaves and the bark and any blossom or fruit or seeds. Carrie Day suggested these things in her talk earlier on the bardic nature and trees. And you can photograph those things in close up too. And you can also use other senses, touch, smell, and listen for sounds. In springtime, when the sap's rising in trees, if you put your ear to the trunk, you might be able to hear that. Do only taste things from trees if you absolutely know that it's safe. Some trees are, but some trees aren't. Yew trees you should not eat. Yew trees are poisonous. Do not eat a yew tree or anything from it. Now you can grow plants. You don't need a garden, although obviously it helps. You can grow seeds in pots or window boxes. It could be vegetables for cooking, herbs for spell work, flowers to beautify your space, or wildlife-friendly plants to attract bees. Where you start will depend on the time of year, from planting in spring and watching things peak from the soil, picking flowers or harvesting in summer, collecting seeds in autumn, or cutting back dead stalks to make room for the next cycle. Even in winter, you can grow some things in pots or plant some bulbs outdoors. Oh, now that has gone very weird. I have to say my slides are not looking quite the way that I created them, but at least they are there. Creating mandalas from natural objects. Using flowers, leaves, and berries and so on in this creative way gives a reason to venture outdoors. Collect things where it's permitted, then take them indoors and arrange them on a sheet of paper. Mandalas made each month from natural objects can reflect our feelings and how they change, as well as celebrating what's happening over the seasons. If you do this each month, then again in different years, you can observe the patterns of similarities. And you can add other things to mandalas. You can add crystals or jewelry or other things with the right resonances. And then spend some time meditating on your work and photograph it before the greenery fades. I'm using the term mandala loosely to mean a spiritually significant picture or pattern to meditate on. The original sense of the word comes from Hinduism and Buddhism as a reflection of the universe and the connectedness of life. And my use is more eclectic. You could call it art for contemplation if you prefer. You can also draw, paint, or sculpt. Sketching from life encourages looking closely at what we're drawing. You become more aware of the shapes of petals or leaves, for example, and adding colour means observing more. It doesn't matter what skill or talent you have, it's not a competition. It's a means of becoming more familiar with the natural world or other aspects of your spiritual path. Art doesn't have to be realistic. You could draw how you feel about the season. It could be completely abstract. You could depict spirits, deities, or lines of energy perceived with psychic vision, which the camera won't record. You could instead sculpt with clay or other materials. Use your imagination to create magical art inspired by all your senses. I made that goddess figurine and the little eggs from air drying clay. And the little hair I painted from a photograph onto some paper and then cut it out. You can write poetry. One prompt for poetry is to jot down all the words or phrases you can think of inspired by a month. It could include folklore, the weather, what's happening in nature, or your thoughts and feelings. And then compose a poem using as many or few of those words or phrases as you like. Poetry doesn't have to rhyme unless you want it to. Japan has a tradition of poetry that references the seasons. Haiku are short poems of 3 lines, and they total 17 syllables. There are 5 syllables on the first and last lines and 7 in the middle. So you do have to kind of count syllables and maybe chop words a bit shorter or think of a different word. I wrote the haiku on the slide on this day 13 years ago, March the 11th, 2010. And I called it Spring Haiku. Under a stormy sky, clouds scud and trees sway. The yellow crocus blooms. Now, after the yellow crocus, onto colour symbolism. You can look at what colour or colours are most present each month in the quality of the light, the flowers in bloom, even the clothes you feel most drawn to wearing. You can light candles of those colours. You can use those colours in what you paint or craft or put on your altar. For me, yellow is the colour for March because so many of the flowers that I see that bloom this season are that colour. And a look at seasonal altars. An altar can be as simple or as complex as you wish. You don't need a huge space. It can be a shelf, a mantelpiece, a window ledge, a box, or of course, a table. Put things on it that resonate with the time of year, such as anything of an appropriate colour, including cloths, candles, candle holders, or crystals. Pick seasonal flowers. If you honour a specific deity, put their image or statue on your altar, but you can also add images of other deities that seem suitable, as well as pictures perhaps of your ancestors or animals associated with the time of year. The picture shows my altar for March, and on it I have things I feel symbolise the month, including those pottery things that I made earlier for my mandala a couple of years ago. And also, there's a pewter hair on jewellery that's very special to me. I also have a miniature narcissus or a daffodil flower and forsythia blossom I picked from my garden. There are yellow crystals and a candle, as well as the goddess plaque, which stays in place there. In the centre of the altar is a tiny cauldron which I filled with wildflower seeds, which I'm going to sow in my garden when the weather's a tiny bit warmer after they've been blessed by the goddess. Seasonal crafts. You can find out about crafts traditional for your area, research folkloric customs or things made in the pagan path that you follow at different times of the year. You can adapt practical magic to honour the seasons, such as making a puppet or doll each month filled with dried seasonal herbs, flowers, grasses, or leaves. You can dress them in appropriate colours. You can use the flowers that you used for, say, a mandala or an altar, and you can dry them and put them into a puppet. And then perhaps later in the year, if you feel you need spring energy, for example, you can put your puppet, your spring puppet, on your altar to represent that energy in your spell work. The slide shows some painted wooden eggs from Poland. They're not ones I decorated myself. They're ones handed down in my family. But painting eggs or replica eggs is a suitable craft for March. You can mould eggs out of air drying clay, like the ones that I made for my mandala. Or if you eat eggs, you could paint hard-boiled eggs. That's also quite a traditional craft. And yeah, moving on to other seasonal food and drink. Yeah, I know the topic of seasonal food and shortages of tomatoes has been in the news, but supermarkets usually stock food from all over the world, and we can usually have things that aren't in season. But eating more local produce can mean we live more sustainably as well as feel in touch with the cycle of the year. I realise practicalities might not allow sourcing everything from farmers' markets, and circumstances might mean we can't grow vegetables ourselves. But considering the options available can help us boost awareness of what's available. You can put seasonal food and drink on altars to enjoy after you've finished a ritual or as part of a celebration, and leave some outside as an offering. Veg that's in season in England includes root vegetables, including those wonky carrots. I said, I'm going to buy a box of wonky vegetables. And I think the carrots I got were particularly wonky. If you're foraging, which you can do, there's early nettles can make a great nettle soup. Dandelion leaves can be used in a salad. But if you are foraging, do make sure that you have permission from where you're the person who owns the land you're picking from, and don't take more than you need. You can also explore annual customs, such as agricultural fairs, non-pagan festivals, and modern yearly customs like open days or parades. While these might not be pagan, they mark days or week in the year for communities we live in. Think about how these activities make you feel. You can research their history, as many customs that seem ancient actually aren't. Some started in Victorian times with as more a kind of a romantic idea of what folklore should be like. Some things were started by people who want to commemorate things. American Mother's Day, which happens later than English Mother's Day, was started by someone who wanted to celebrate mothers, for example. But it's an important day for us, for people in the modern world. Oh, goodness. That has really gone a little strange. That is not how I designed that slide. I do hope you can read it. Anyway, rituals. You don't have to do rituals as part of your practice, but I believe they can help with getting into a suitable state of mind for magical or spiritual observances. And that slide shows the altar for a family-friendly spring rite I set up outdoors. Rituals can be as simple as setting out a sacred space, doing a short meditation, lighting a candle, or stating your intent. You could do it every day, every week, every month, at the Wheel of the Year festivals, or when you feel the new season has arrived or needs celebrating. Just going to have a little sip of water. Now, I'm sure most of you watching this do rituals already and have a ritual style that follows a tradition you follow. But I've just given an outline of a simple kind of circle ritual for those who might be interested in it. First, clear your space by sweeping with a broom or something similar. That's just to clear out unwanted energy. Then set up a seasonal altar. We've got a bunny on that, which one of the children brought along, and bunnies are quite seasonal. Cast a circle by going around your space sunwise or diasil, visualizing light encircling you and keeping you safe. You can use a wand or just point. Raise magical energy. You can do that by drumming or singing or dancing, or visualizing energy rising from the ground and descending from the sky. Say words to honor the seasons and deities, spirits, or ancestors. And this could be a poem, perhaps something you wrote, a prayer, or a hymn, or a chant. Do magical, spiritual, or psychic work, such as spells, crafts, writing, meditation, or asking for blessings. When you've done all that and you've finished, thank any spirits, ancestors, or deities you asked to attend your rite. Release your circle by going around your space anti-clockwise or widdershins. Visualize the circle opening up and unused energy returning to the ground or sky. And finally, it's quite important to ground, which you can do by pressing your feet and hands firmly on a solid surface. And it can also be useful to have something to eat or drink. It's nice to share food and drink after a ritual, but it can also help you ground. Some people like to create sacred space and cast a circle before journaling, scrapbooking, or any form of spiritual crafting. It isn't essential. Do what feels right for you. And I'm now going to talk about magic for the month of March. Yeah, again, another slide that hasn't quite worked the way I tried to create it, but I hope you can read it still. Named after Mars, the Roman god of war, March can bring stormy weather where I live, but the sight of flowers lifts my mood, and this month is when my garden really starts to bloom with colour. I see yellow daffodils and pink and yellow primroses in my garden, but here's a little more flower lore. Now, daffodils, the birthday flower for those born in March. Daffodils are the national flower of Wales and worn on March the 1st for St David's Day. Magically, they bring love, luck, and fertility. You can put them on your altar when you're doing spells for those things, or anywhere in your home for their bright yellow cheerfulness. Don't eat them, they are poisonous. As an added precaution, avoid treading on daffs outdoors because gardening folklore says that trampling on them invites bad luck. Primroses. The name of primroses, prima rosa, comes from the Latin meaning first rose, and they're steeped in folklore and magical custom. If they grow around your home, they're said to be protective, to protect against all kinds of things, but particularly from mischievous fairies. They're also supposed to help people see fairies or things rendered invisible by fairies. Crocuses. Well, they're magically associated with love, insight, and magic. I mention them in my haiku poem for March, although they're usually blooming in my garden in February. The crocuses in my garden are yellow, which are quite a common variety. There are about 80 species of crocus, some of which are poisonous. The most valuable is the edible saffron crocus, which has been used as a dye and to flavour food for thousands of years. Saffron is traditionally used in Easter baking, and there is a type of Easter cake called saffron cake. March is a time when many seeds are sown in my part of the world, and scarecrows are traditionally made to protect them. You can make a scarecrow as a guardian for anything you plant this spring. Now, that could be something in the garden, or it could be in the sense of magical working. You could make a little mini scarecrow. If you have a space where you regularly do magic, you could make a little mini scarecrow as a guardian for your magical intentions. Now, we're currently in Lent, which is usually thought of as a Christian prelude to Easter. But it wasn't always just that. It might have originally derived from a word for the time of year when days lengthen, according to Professor Ronald Hutton in The Stations of the Sun. So it could be celebrated by anyone, including pagans. Historically, it combined joy with abstinence, and you don't have to be Christian to get into the Lenten spirit, which means enjoying warmth, light, and the return of greenery, while appreciating there isn't much fresh food, especially meat. And traditionally in the past, a Lenten diet would have been vegan, veg, and things like that. Now, that idea can be revived by anyone who wants to reduce their meat and dairy intake. And I personally think that this is a better time of year in terms of seasonal stuff for vegan weeks than January. The spring equinox is on March the 20th this year. In the Wheel of the Year, it's a time to celebrate springtime, but it's also associated with balance because it's when the day and night are roughly equal length, and it's positioned between summer and winter. Now, the Christian festival of Easter falls on the first Sunday after the full moon following the spring equinox, because Jesus' crucifixion is placed after Jewish Passover. And this year it's on April the 9th, although in some years it's in March, and next year it's going to be in March. Easter wasn't deliberately plonked on top of an ancient pagan festival. It often gets cited that the Venerable Bede, a monk in the early 8th century, wrote that the name of Easter derived from a goddess called Eostra. And many pagans do honour a goddess of that name at this time of year, but academics have debated whether Bede was correct, and it's possible the Anglo-Saxon word Eostra was more to do with the season of spring rather than a goddess. Or it might relate to a goddess of the dawn, like Eos, according to Professor Ronald Hutton. It is possible that some older pre-Christian customs have got merged into Easter customs, but we just don't know. Historians don't have a lot of evidence for that. Now, at the end of the month, we have Earth Hour. Every year on a Saturday at the end of March is Earth Hour. And people all over the world turn off electric lights for an hour to symbolise their commitment to the planet. It's organised by the World Wildlife Fund, but it's also a grassroots event, and it's really perfect for adapting for pagan ceremonies. You can light a candle, make a dedication to do something extra to help the environment or to continue an existing pledge. You could do spells to protect wildlife and endangered habitats, or you could have a candlelit meal serving locally produced seasonal food, or enjoy locally produced drinks by candlelight. I know that there's some beer that's brewed in my area, and enjoying some beer by candlelight brewed locally is quite a good thing to do. You can say words to Gaia, Mother Nature, or any deity of protection for the earth. This could be thanks to the earth for her bounty before eating and drinking. And here's a translation of an ancient Homeric poem to Gaia that dates back to the 7th century BCE. I will sing of well-founded Gaia, mother of all, eldest of all beings. She feeds all creatures that are in the world, all that go upon the goodly land, and all that are in the paths of the sea, and all that fly. All of these are fed of her store. Right, now that's the last of my slides, and that is a picture of my book that's coming out later this year, Pagan Portals Rounding the Wheel of the Year. And that's the address for my blog. I'm now going to try and end the slides, or I don't know whether the slides can be ended. Brilliant. And I'm not sure if I've got time for a question or two, but I'm going to see if there are any. Oh, Damon, I'm glad you think there are some good ideas there. A number of us used to practice all the oh, okay. Number of us practice all the full Jones and Wheel of the Year. Then that cycle stopped. We all turn around practices, often without formal rituals, but we missed it. It wasn't the same. Now we are back together since Samhain. Yes, it feels like we've come home. Oh, we have. Yes, absolutely. I think the last few years that it just practicing on your own or practicing over Zoom, it's not the same. It's not the same. It's just so lovely to do rituals with other people. I quite agree. I like the I love Earth Hour. Yeah, my husband and I do Earth Hour together, and we will yeah, we will have some food and drink by candlelight, and usually like raise a toast to Gaia. Mm. Are there any more questions? Do you have a favorite? Oh, do you know? I think spring is my favorite season, and Beltane is probably my favorite festival. I my birthday's in May, so that's probably partly to do with it. But I think every month that comes round, I think there's something really special about it. I do struggle a bit in January. I don't like the cold, but I think there is something. I think it's actually right that there should be a time of struggle. I think rather like going back to the Wheel of Fortune in tarot, I think it's it's experiencing the full cycle of the year is includes things like understanding that things can sometimes be a bit tough. Okay. Well, if there's no more questions, I just want to thank you very, very much for coming along to hear me talk. And I hope you enjoyed MoonCon. I think it's a brilliant selection of talks, and I hope you enjoy the rest of them throughout the afternoon.